now that we're live, Beyond the Headlines, Monday nights on Grenada Broadcasting Network. Welcome to the program. This evening, we're doing things in reverse. We're looking at the budget review 2022. Fast forward to 2022, yes. We're reviewing the presentation made by the Minister for Finance, the Honorable Gregory Boeing, in the Houses last Friday. I'm pleased to present our panelists this evening. We have Economist Mikol Mortley out of Jamaica. We have the agricultural sector representative in the Senate right here in Grenada, Mr. Roderick Clair, and we have the president of the Public Workers Union, Mr. Brian Grimes. Gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening to you. Good evening to good evening, Grenada.
Right. And so for those of us who are not very familiar with Mikol Mortley, I wish to introduce him to the Grenadian public this evening. He's an economist and current PhD economics student at the University of West Indies, Mona campus, and he also currently serves as a Jamaica House Fellow in the Office of the Prime Minister of Jamaica. Mr. Mortley is a highly skilled financial services professional who has served in various capacities in commercial and investment banking, where he spent 5 years prior to his current role. At UWI Mona, he served as a graduate teaching and research assistant, as an adjunct assistant lecturer in macroeconomics and financial markets. Mikol, it is great for us to have you with us on the program this evening. On Beyond the Headlines, we are not insular. Budgets are universal. Templates might be different to look at what's happening locally on the ground, but we know that these financial instruments, they're universal. So we're glad that you could join us. Roderick, we know that you have been in the Senate making representation on behalf of the fishermen of Grenada and the farmers, and we look forward to your looking through the budget and your thoughts on what has been presented. Mr. Brian Grimes, the president of the Public Workers Union, earned his place on the panel this evening because there's been a lot of focus on public workers. We've heard the budget being described as Santa Claus come early. We've heard the naysayer saying, no. This is not an elections budget. So let's begin, gentlemen, by looking at some of the highlights. We have pulled some of the highlights from the budget, and let's go to a PowerPoint presentation where we begin this evening. The Minister for Finance presenting a $1.3 billion budget. So producer, let's look at that. Let's look at the first slide, and we'll move along, and then we'll have presentations from the panelists. So first, Mikol, I'm coming to you over in Jamaica because you took the time over the weekend to peruse the document. You went over the Minister for Finance's presentation and you saw the budget, and your thoughts are what?
Firstly, it makes perfect sense to educate ourselves in terms of the figures. So the first thing that would have stood out would have been the total headline figure. But at the same time, given the context of COVID-19, it would have been a significant adjustment from last year, and I noted that the minister did note that Grenada was in a 19-month bubble. And after which the reopening after 19 months would have caused some amount of shift in terms of economic activity. But based on what happened after COVID, because we're still in COVID, clearly my first thoughts are that the budget signifies that COVID was placed at the forefront of the budgetary planning process. And with that, I think there are quite a few things that are interesting notes and point takes. So I'm not sure if we're going to go into the PowerPoint now, but in terms of crunching those numbers, the $1.352 billion revenue budget is the first thing that clearly that clearly stands out.
Right. So let's just get the slide back up again, and then I'm going to ask our the two panelists to weigh in on their thoughts on the numbers. So let's go back. So the budget provides for a total expenditure, including amortization, of $1.3 billion, addressing, as you said, Mikol, the unparalleled health socioeconomic challenges caused by the pandemic, and the government makes it clear that this remains a priority. And it says the 2022 budget strategy aims to address these challenges. So when we start to crunch some of the numbers a little later, I'm certain. But let me ask first Brian. Brian, the figure, were you expecting that kind of number there from the finance minister?
Yes. Well, first off, good night. Good night to my fellow panelists. Good night to the viewers in Grenada and across the world. I just want to mention I'm having a bit of technical difficulty here because I'm not seeing the pop-up that's on the screen. But in regards to the figures presented, this has been the $1 billion figure has been tradition throughout this administration in the last few years to have $1 billion budget. For the fact that it is a $1 billion budget in a pandemic period, I am still not shocked at that. I am not surprised, based on the fact that we are in a recession. Economics 101 would tell you, based on Keynesian economics, that in a situation like this, where there's a recession, yes, I'm seeing now. Thank you very much. What the government seeks to do is ensure that there is a lot of spending from their end and a lot of tax cuts. So the budget might end up being something what we would call at a deficit budget, but it's important to stimulate the economy. So from that perspective of economics, I'm not surprised at that figure at all.
Right. Roderick, your thought on the overall budgetary figure?
Right. Yeah, good night to everyone, our viewers, listeners, fellow panelists. As Brian would have said, I think that we are in that zone of billions. And so the shift, while not significant, say from 2020 to 21 to 22, we are within that zone. But I think what is significant about the point you make is that the focus on the whole issue of the COVID-19, its effect, and how do you work around that? Of course, budgeting, we know, is a planning process, and catering for a worst-case scenario of a loss. It's a more conservative approach rather than, in these difficult times, focusing for a surplus. So the question would be, how do, inside of that, we as a country work hard to really overcome and survive, as Mikol said, this current wave after the pandemic. I think that is how I see it.
Definitely, and we could move on to slide number 2, because the issues that you're raising now inside of the budget and talking about deficit and comparatives, we have some numbers there. So Mikol, you can take us through those numbers. With the current...
So with the current numbers, the Minister of Finance suggested a recurrent revenue budget of $722.2 million, grant revenue of $175.4 million, which would mean a total revenue budget of $897.6 million EC dollars. On the expenditure side, the current expenditure is $661.7 million, capital expenditure of $333.8. And just to give the listeners a little bit more idea of between current versus capital, current expenditure is essentially what you have to pay for as a government almost every single year. So this would include salaries and expenses which essentially don't really change over time. Your capital expenditure would be more so your investment type expenditure. So you would have So you would have heard the minister talk about the investment in schools, for example. So that school building expenditure would have been included in the capital expenditure. The current account surplus of 60.5 million and the principal repayments and amortization of $356.7 million. So based on the three figures, current expenditure, capital expenditure, and principal repayments and amortization, that's really where the 1.352 billion EC dollars would come from, which would mean that on the other side, you would have the overall deficit versus the primary deficit, which are counted here as 34.2 versus $97.9 million. But what I did note, however, is that the principal repayments and amortization payments, for me to get back that $97.9 million, I have to subtract it from I have to subtract it from the actual difference between revenue versus expenditure, which I found it a little strange, but I guess that's from my point of view, in the sense that the revenue payments don't necessarily seem as if they are a part of the the amortization payments don't really seem as if they are part of the revenue consideration, which is a little strange to me. But I suppose hopefully you might have a response to that coming out of the ministry for some clarification.
Definitely, and so let's go on to the other side, and then I want to ask Roderick a question. Let's go on to the other side, producer. So the expected results relative to 2020 performance, he started to look at that, and what we'll do is we'll update the slides and come back to it. So Roderick, you mentioned the need to stimulate the economy, and so we might be heading in deficit column, but stimulation of the economy is essential. Elaborate on that first, Roderick.
Yes, so what do we have to understand? What will drive the economy? So how do we drive our GDP? How do we bring in more foreign exchange into the country? Through whether it's tourism, whether it's agriculture, whether it's fishing, whether it's manufacturing, and also how do we manage our inputs? Whether it's food import bill and whether it's other sort of material that we import, how can we become more resourceful? So as a country, we have to figure out from where we sit. So for example, as my constituents of farmers and fishers, we have to sit among ourselves and see what can we do to increase our local production, to drive exports, to also reduce imports, and how can we use more of our local resources to get a lot of the production being done rather than having to depend on imported inputs. I think that is also a very important factor. Along with that, it would mean whether we get more efficient, whether we use different technologies, but also, Odette, what is very critical is that we need to be unlocking this thing, because most of our farmers, fishers, and we know the situation. That is why we speak about the amount of monies that are available at the banks in GDP and so on to stimulate. But the issue is that our farmers and fishers are catching hell to access this money. So whilst that might be the wish, we have to find mechanism to make sure that these monies really get there to make the difference. Otherwise, we'll continue to see those deficits. So that is a big challenge I think the government have. Our farmers and fishers, since last year I become the senator, that is a big issue. How much $1 million are available? But is it really being spent? Is it being turned over to our fishers and farmers? And if there is a challenge, let us sit down and say, what is the limiting factor to make this work? And I think that is a major issue that the government need to intervene in this, for example, GDP and those places. They need to do that, because we're running into that same problem in 2022. I see it already.
When you say that they're catching whatever to access the money, what are some of the challenges they're telling you they've been having?
Well, part of the problem is that they don't even know the problem. So, for example, when I speak to I cannot call their names here, the gentleman, he said they went through some training in fishing and they're supposed to get some funding through GDP. They make the applications and they're hearing nothing, nada. In fact, I had a meeting with the same poultry folks. We had a meeting with Mr. Lord and his team, and we discussed. And then he was shocked to learn that persons found it easier to go to the other banks and credit union to access funding than to come to GDB despite the favorable interest rates and other things that are being advertised. So this is up to yesterday again, I was speaking to the goat and sheep farmers out in Sotes. They have funding under the Agricom for almost $500,000. But to get almost $30,000 from the GDB because they don't have permission based on how they set up to borrow money, they have it difficult to access. So here's a World Bank project that is authorizing them based on a business plan to access close to $250,000 or $300,000, but they cannot go to the bank to get about $30,000 when GDB itself has a facility called the Partial Credit Guarantee Scheme, which is supposed to be able to sort of give a sort of guarantee for maybe up to about 50% of that money. So how do we intend to really make a difference? This is the challenges that we have, and it's real stories.
So, Roderick, one of the things we could explore a little later, because if we belabor some of these points, we quickly run out of time, but I'd like for us to come back to how do we resolve some of those issues. Let's go to Brian. Brian, the point about stimulating the economy, and people sometimes would jump and shout at, oh, there's a deficit in the budget. Your thoughts on the fact that we have to expect deficits along the way in this kind of circumstance?
Yes, I'd like to elaborate on that. Thank you. A lot of people, they are criticizing the budget. I'm not necessarily praising the budget, but based on my rudimentary understanding of economics, the government had no choice but to go that route. If they maintain their stance of being tight-fisted in terms of being generous to workers, giving money to workers to spend in the economy, there will be a further hemorrhaging of our economy. In that basic economic theory, and I guess my comrades on the panel can expand on it if they wish to, they have an obligation as central government to ensure that money is in the economy, that disposable income is placed in the hands of our citizens, in the hands of our workers. And they also have to ensure that they cut taxes as much as possible. And we saw that in regards to the situation with Grenlec, where they are saying the bills will become less, they will take off some VAT and so forth on it. We also saw that in regards to fuel prices, where they have stabilized our fuel prices or prices at the pumps. So these things are not shocking. Many are calling it an election budget, which I'm not doubting. But in the grand scheme of things and what governments have to do, I think that was very much expected on the Grenada, on the government's part regarding how they treated with this and the fact that they have absorbed a deficit and they are moving forward with this. How sustainable it is would be the question, how long they can carry on for.
Right. And we have some excerpts from the Minister of Finance's presentation that we will carry in a little while. But I want to go back to Mikol and want to continue with the slides, looking at some of the numbers, some of the highlights. So, Mikol, if we go forward, we've looked at the primary surplus and the overall surplus, and looking at 2020 versus 2021. And your thoughts on what you're seeing here, looking at the expected results for this year compared to 2020.
Right. So based on what's on the screen, you would see that there was a, call it a 0.1%, a 0.1% increase in recurrent revenues. On the expenditure side, it was about an 8.06% reduction. In terms of grant spending, it was a 125.6% increase, which clearly indicates that the government would have gotten some overseas support. And I think I did read that quite a bit of the support came from some of the international funding partners, such as the World Bank and so on. And then what was slightly surprising, and I'm going to say it's surprising because it's actually a good result, is that the primary surplus moved from a deficit of 72.4 million to a primary surplus of 117.1 million in 2021, with an overall surplus of 62.7 million, which scores well or harbors well for good fiscal responsibility. But there are 2 points that the other panelists raised that I do want to touch on quite quickly, is that particularly through the pandemic, quite a few governments have had to relax their fiscal rules, particularly in relation to keeping a primary surplus target. So the example here in Jamaica is that we did relax our primary surplus target for us to reach down to, I think it was 3.5% instead of 6.5% primary surplus, so as to give us the fiscal space in order to expend on things such as health and education. And based on the actual line items, which I think are on further slides, is that it kind of shows a slight increase in health as well as education spending. But based on Mr. St. Clair's point, in terms of the financing for farmers and fisherfolk, for example, I do sympathize. I sympathize really because I think we have some very similar issues in terms of when government allocates money for individuals tend not to get that money because of some banking rules. So a lot of times you will have money being allocated for small and medium enterprises. I'm not sure if there was a specific allocation to farmers. Maybe there should have been, as well as allowing farmers to access this money through, like a cooperative, or allow another bank that has more farmer customers to actually access this funding through.
Excellent point. We're looking for solutions to problems. So, Roderick, that's a solution being presented there. And you mentioned some of the line items. So we go to the next slide so we could move along quickly on that. And we could keep cutting and dissecting. So the allocations in the budget: education 142 million, health 9 to 1.7, the social safety mechanisms 26.1, agriculture 35 million, tourism assistance 20.9, Carriacou and Martinique affairs 19.5. Brian, I'm coming to you. I'm tossing to you first. What's your thought of the allocations? Agriculture 35 is in third spot. What's your thought on generally the allocations, Brian?
Yeah, well, looking through the document, I was pleasantly surprised to see the allocation for education. This is not something I look at primarily because most of the times I look at health and so forth. But we also, the Public Workers Union, we also represent people within the education sector, specifically at the TMR Show Community College. And I'm happy to see the increased allocation for education simply because the subventions being given to TAMCC on a yearly basis have proven insufficient to the functioning and the operations of that institution. So with that increase amount allocation for that, we trust that TAMCC will get more money in order to service salaries, increments, infrastructure, and so forth. In regards to health, I think there was a slight increase to $2 million. Health, I think, deserves a lot more. In regards to agriculture, my comrade, Brother Roderick, will go deep into that, but I think that figure is anemic because we hear a lot of talk. There's a lot of talk shops around agriculture and how important it is. Eat what you grow what you eat, and so forth. But I can tell you, from the perspective of the president of the Public Workers Union and seeing how they treat with, for example, the Maribo Agricultural Station, a lot is left to be desired. the infrastructure of that place, the salaries of those individuals and so forth. We talk a lot about agriculture, but in terms of tangible injections into that particular field, we are not seeing it. The situation at Maribo, you have terrible infrastructure. I'm talking about workers there, sharing, male, female, sharing dressing rooms. I'm talking about there are not basic amenities there, no internet and so forth. So you're wondering, why should agricultural station have internet? We are living in a modern era where meetings are conducted virtually and so forth. This program is being done virtually at this point. So it's a lot of what is being said is just being said, but there are no actions to go behind it. And this allocation towards agriculture, I'm not comparing it to 2020, but I think it's anemic. I think it's very, very anemic. So those are my initial reactions to those figures.
Right. So, Roderick, we're coming to you, and we know that agriculture, that's your community of folks there, the agriculture and fisheries, but we would like you to go from top to bottom and talk to us about the numbers allocated.
Sure, definitely. I appreciate that. I mean, if we look at the whole issue on agriculture, now remember, viewers must understand that we don't have the breakdown of inside what goes in the detail, but education, we need to have a strong education system. And as Brian said, that is very critical, not only at the TAMCC level, but at the whole national level, to build our resilience in all different aspects. Of course, we know we don't have a little bias to agriculture, etc., but we need to have a strong education system where our youth can able to carry this country forward. And of course, the TAMCC issue, I've been calling for us to look at the whole issue of a fishing school and other sort of diversification of that curriculum such that it could add more value to this country and so on. So that is one aspect from education. As a former teacher, of course, you want to see those sort of things happening. From the health, of course, we know the issues, and we need to ensure that we have a health system that can support all of us. So these are two good areas, and we may say even health can even receive more funds, and to be sure that we have a healthy system. Now, in terms of the safety net program, I want to jump quickly straight into whatever support is given to what we refer to as the poor and vulnerable, etc. I've been speaking to a gentleman recently and saying to me, look, guy, $700-800, you can have a nice little hydroponic system around the house that can grow 60 to 100 different vegetables, etc. So I say this to say that if we want to start talking about science and technology and all of those things, for within $1,000, we can use some of the same safety net money to create more independence for our poor and vulnerable, quote unquote, if you want to say that. But what it will do is that within the household, the younger ones can also get the benefit to attract towards technology and so on. So I think that is a very significant note I want to leave there. Of course, on the issue of agriculture, I don't want us to be fooled that when you watch the speech from 2021 and the 2022, collectively, the Minister of Finance would have indicated that in excess of $40 million would go towards agriculture. That is recurrent capital and all other roads and all of these things would go in excess of $40 million. Now, I'm not too sure how much was spent yet because I haven't looked at the detail. So when we see 35 here, it is a decline in terms of the allocations. And even when you look at the recurrent and the capital in that small votes and so on, directly within the ministries, we are speaking something like about $600,000 more than 2021. So I don't want us to lose sight of that very said fact. And the amount of challenges that we face in the agriculture sector, and to basically have a budget within that framework. Some of the things I would want to see, Odette, I have a debate in about 2 weeks' time. I think I would address them in that space. So I don't want to go into too much of detail, but definitely in the budget speech, it was mentioned about pretty elastic, and that is basically we need to revamp and have some different modification of the police force such that the pre-elastic officers would not move from a pre-elastic officer wanting to be a sergeant or a corporal in police, but it can be a corporal or a sergeant or ASP within the pre-elastic arm of the police force. And if we don't get that right in our head, then we are spinning top in mud. The police itself saying
I'm certain.
one of the major crime that is increasing, almost number 2, is pre-larceny. Yet still, what are you doing about it? In fact, what we have done, we've gone into marine and we say we look at some marine strategy, some new system. We're going to invest some money.
Well,
so even land where
Roderick,
we are very able to move around, we cannot even handle. How are we going to do well on the sea? This. So you wonder, our farmers and fishers wondering what is happening.
I know it's a pet peeve of yours, but we don't want to.
Pet peeve of mine is of my constituents and many others.
Right. Let me just go back to Mikol. I want to ask for a comparative. Let's go back to the slide on the allocations. And Mikol, as you look at Jamaica, and I know you've been studying some of the other Caribbean islands, as you look at some of the allocations, you want to contextualize for us how you think we're doing. You did do a nice piece just now where you said, it's admirable what the government has achieved and is trying to achieve in this year's budget. When you look at the allocations, what are your thoughts really?
Well, to be honest, my first thought is that I need to see Appendix 1 based on the minister's statement that has the full details. These were more so the headline figures that he kind of brought out throughout the presentation. But clearly the headline allocation being given to education and health is definitely good. However, there still also needs to be a balance between development activity, health, human services, and economic growth. So, for example, the major drivers within your economy are, I'm going to assume, construction, tourism, agriculture, right? Based on the growth figures that were stated, at headline, construction is the main sector. And it seems as if that might also be the direction in terms of where funding is being pushed. Construction is all well and good. However, you can't just build. You have to strike a balance elsewhere. So persons who find their livelihoods in agriculture, persons who do it in other services, persons who do it in transportation, and so on. So there always needs to be a balance. However, based on the context of the pandemic we're in, and the fact that revenue is scarce, and what I didn't see is how this is going to be funded, as well as the full-on breakdown of what these allocations are going to go towards. So it's good for us to talk about and say, yes, education got a lot, agriculture didn't get enough, tourism probably could have gotten some more, the safety net could be used another way, but I don't think there's enough information yet for a full analysis. But at the same time, education getting what it's getting is very comparable to, for example, what we have here in Jamaica. What Mr. St. Clair brought up about the issue of radio larceny, and I'm not going to belabor it too much, is that we are definitely neighbors in that. It's a serious issue in Jamaica as well, and it does require government to be proactive in terms of laws, as well as in terms of getting in terms of channeling resources into the police force to try to catch predial larcenists. So there is still a lot that can be done, but we also have to bring it back to say, how are we going to fund these things? And many times what persons don't understand is that when the government is funding, the government tends to be funding from taxes. And if you want the government to pay more, you might have to fork out more, which nobody wants. So we all have to be mindful of that.
it's a chicken and egg situation, and the minister did say that the notes will accompany his presentation on Friday. So some of the information that we're looking for will be found in the notes to be submitted. What we need to do at this time is take a commercial break, and we'll come right back. This is Beyond the Headlines on GBN Television. We're reviewing the 2022 budget. It's considered an election budget. In some circles, the Prime Minister jumped ahead and said, let me take in front before in front take me. No, we'll have that comment from the Prime Minister and look at some of the issues that has caused some people to say it's a Santa Claus budget when we come back right after this message.
Just a reminder, the global pandemic is not over. Office Pros and markers are still here to protect you. Available are several versions of touchless hand sanitizer and hand soap dispensers, dispenser stands, paper towel and toilet paper dispensers, and thermometers. Also available, hand sanitizing gel, sanitizing solution, hand soap, Lysol products, face masks, and gloves, all offered at the best price on the market and backed by a full warranty and protection plan with free installation. We are located on the Woodlands Main Road. Call Office Pros on 444-2393 or markers on 439-2393. You can also visit the Facebook page for more information. And never forget to remember, I, Mr. Markers, would never forsake you. Believe that.
Store foods safely in the event of an emergency or disaster. Check expiry dates and store items that are closer to expiration at the front of the cupboard. Protect opened packages of dried items from pests and losing freshness by placing them in containers with lids. Always keep food covered and stored away from cleaning items. A message from the Grenada Food and Nutrition Council in collaboration with the Ministry of Health with support from the Pan American Health Organization.
Introducing Color by Seasons. 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 Color by Seasons.
Give some love with dread. Bringing love for you this year. Communion show with that weekend. With gifts of love with dread.
We're bringing you gifts of love with cheer at the communal. This Christmas, we are your Santa. It's all about sharing the warmth of this season with those you love. Get in on this special loan, taking advantage of great interest rates with no principal payments until January 2022. Share the gift of love. Make it a merrier Christmas with the communal. Exciting prizes for members throughout the promotion. For we are your Santa this Christmas. Offer ends January 31st, 2022. Lending terms and conditions apply.
Communion show with that weekend. With gifts of love with dread. Grenada.
Count me, because we all count.
Count all of us. Nothing about us without us.
Count me.
Count me. We all count too.
Count me.
Count me. We all count too.
Count me. We are people too.
Count all of us. Nothing about us without us. Because we all count for the coming census.
Welcome back to Beyond the Headlines tonight, reviewing the 2022 budget as presented by the Minister for Finance last Friday. We have Economist Mikol Mortley out of Jamaica. He is crunching the numbers for us. We have the Agricultural Senator, Mr. Roderick Sinclair. He likes to make it clear it's agriculture and fisheries. Fisherfolk, we salute you this evening. The President of the Public Workers Union, Mr. Brian Grimes. Brian, it is great to have you as always. And speaking of the Public Workers Union, let's return to the slide. There's a note that the Minister for Finance made on Friday that we want to highlight on this upcoming slide. Basically, he was talking about recurrent expenditure and recurrent expenditure remaining high. He said this was due in part to greater outlays on wages, salaries, and pensions associated with the implementation of the 4% salary increase for public officers. Mr. Grimes, it's in your lap.
Yes, well, that is understood. Let me just say, Odette, primarily all the success that we have seen in fighting COVID is attributed to the hard work of public officers in this country. You're talking about border control, border security, collection of revenue, taking care of the sick, caregiving. All these are done by public officers. So there should be commensurate investment to that. In regards to the 4% wage increase, the ministers themselves, based on my information, have given themselves that. So public officers certainly, they more than deserve those wage increases.
But let's interject here. Let's interject here, Brian, and say that the Minister for Health was asked about this, and he said that was not the case. Let's just put that on the table.
All right, great. I have my information, and I'm sticking with that. Yes. So tremendous work was done by public officers in 2021, and there should be a show, a demonstration apart from pots and pans and just talk on programs and talk in Parliament about the work of public officers. So this is understood. So they should not be crying about this. But I must make this point, and I want to read this with them. And this came from the budget. It said, Mr. Speaker, workers on contract have long clamored for better conditions. Cabinet has directed the Department of Public Administration to develop a framework for addressing the concerns of these employees. I must say one of the concerns I have in listening to the budget is that there is not clarity in those statements. What does he mean by a framework? I want to say this. If in the month of January, our contract workers who are all over the public service, including the health sector, whom they have praised, and in the front line and so forth, do not receive the 4% as the rest of the public officers. That means that the words uttered in Parliament, the words uttered in the budget are simply mamagism, and it's not real. I want to go on record as saying, yes, the Public Workers Union, we are thankful for the 1 month salary given to health sector workers and so forth. But we are not like Esau in the Bible, who gave away his birthright for a bowl of soup. In other words, this short-term solution cannot cut it. We are looking at regularization here at the Grenada Public Workers Union. We are looking at fair treatment, equity, and not segregation. So one way the government will demonstrate that they are serious about public officers, they are serious about balancing what's happening within the public service and increasing and improving morale, is to pay the 4% to contract officers and ensure that contract officers, either they are regularized or there are provisions in place to increase their salary to counter inflation. If that doesn't take place, then this government is just about brango, jokes, and mamagism.
Mikol, the whole issue of the public sector wage bill has always been a point that ministers for finance across the Caribbean find it necessary to address in their budgets, correct?
Correct. I'm going to quickly bring it down memory lane. I know it's a very touchy issue because it has to do with generally a large chunk of the working population of those countries. And increasing your public sector wage bill does have a permanent effect. So, for example, this 4% wage increase is not necessarily going to be a one-off increase. It's a permanent increase, because you would increase, you'd have to pay now as recurrent expenditure over the next period until you increase it again. So the example that I'm going to use from Jamaica is in 2009-10, when we were under our first of the last two IMF agreements, where our increasing of public sector workers' wage bill actually caused a derailment of our program. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to happen in Grenada, but I'm saying that caution should always be given in terms of looking at public sector wage bills, given the fact that once you make this permanent increase, you're going to have to find a way to finance it. So an increase is good. We all want an increase. However, we have to find sustainable ways to finance the increases. In relation to contract workers, it's a sticking point in Jamaica as well. There are many contract workers in the public sector, and there is this whole thing about the idea of permanence versus regularizing the contracts and so on. What might be a medium-term solution would be an extension of contracts with the same benefits as permanence. So, for example, instead of making a worker a permanent employee, you grant a 5-year contract, and the terms of an extension of the contract would then be performance-based. So, if you move to a system of performance, then performance-based incentives, you would then be able to say, if you work more, you do well in your job, you actually put out the effort, then you should be rewarded. If it's going to be the case that you're just getting an increase because everybody wants an increase, that's where the line starts to toe. And this is probably one of my more controversial views. But it has to be said that, when you give workers an increase, it's never going to be enough. And that's just humans. If you give me a 10% increase, I'm going to want 15%. If you give me a 5% increase, I'm going to want 8%. So we just have to be mindful that there are limits and we are operating within a different environment. But what I will say is that based on Mr. Grimes' point, or a way for the government to show that it is more interested in keeping workers happy, is that you have a long-term wage strategy. So, for example, in Jamaica, we moved into a cycle of a 4-year wage deal as opposed to a 1-year wage deal, where the workers' unions negotiated wage agreements over a 4-year cycle. In this current period, Jamaica also issued a 4% increase to the majority of workers' unions as well. So that too is definitely an option, but it has always been a major sticking point between unions as well as ministers of finance.
Brian, you want to weigh in on anything here?
Yes.
Roderick, don't feel lonely. We're coming to you shortly. Go ahead, Brian.
I definitely want to weigh in. I respect the views of my colleague, my fellow panelists, but I can say different territories have unique circumstances. In Grenada, we have seen that contract officers have been maltreated by this administration. What do I mean by that? And one can appreciate that if you live in the same economic environment, you have to face the same forces, economic forces like inflation, cost of living, and so forth. We have hundreds of contract officers within the public service that have not received increases in years. So basically, essentially, what is happening here? What is happening here is that it's not that their standard of living has stabilized, it has literally regressed. Because if your salary is the same year after year after year, and inflation goes up each and every year, basically, that means basically your salary is diminishing and your standard of living is diminishing. And the unions have been speaking out on this over and over for the past few years, but it seems as though there, for whatever reason, there is an awakening, and I hope that it transcends into some, tangible moves on the part of government to ensure that this doesn't happen going forward. Fundamentally, we here at the Greater Public Workers Union believe that every single time that there are wage increases, the contract officers are not supposed to be part of economic appetite. They are supposed to be part and parcel of receiving those increases as well. What is happening is that there is the public service, there is a lot of disillusionment there based on the treatment. And again, I want to repeat, maybe much to the chagrin of the host of the program, that people in the ministries, the parliamentarians have given themselves increases. Why can't the contract officers get it too? And I will go on record as saying that, not GBN, all right?
You go on the record as saying that not GVN, because as part of responsible reporting, we reached out to the government. One of the representatives said that was not the case. But we could go further. This evening, the Honorable Minister for Foreign Trade, Oliver Joseph, was making a case and saying, well, the ministers work as hard as the public servants. They have greater levels of responsibility. So he was putting in a defense for, if that was the case, that it's not something that they should be shy about. I see you wanting to answer. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I want to respond to that. Yes, the ministers work. There is no denying that. But in the context of public officers, there is no comparison. Odette, you are Grenadian. You can appreciate the struggle that we are having with pension in this country, where we work for going on 40 years and we don't get any pension. The ministers ensure that they get pension by the age of 55, that they get gratuities every 4 years to the tune of $75,000 to $80,000. Yes, and we do not have that as yet because they have disenfranchised us. They have paid attorneys, they have paid solicitors to go to court to defend their right to disenfranchise public officers. So there is no comparison there. And Minister Oliver Joseph, I have respect for him, but I want to fundamentally disagree with his position and in his comparison to himself, where he gets gas allowance, telephone allowance, entertainment allowance, duty allowance, and dare to compare himself to a working class public officer. That is totally unfair.
Well, I'm not certain if he compared himself, but that's subject to interpretation. And just for the record, to let the public know that we did invite the government to have a representative on tonight's program. Unfortunately, that did not materialize. Right. So we would start inviting our callers to weigh in on the conversation. But before we do, there were some measures that were announced last week that measures that have been welcomed in several quarters here, but it led to the theme that it was probably a Santa Claus budget, an elections budget. But we have the opening salvo from the Prime Minister going on record as saying, let's take that report at this time.
I know some people might want to term it some election budget. Let me take in front before in front take me. So they might want to do that. But we have had several elections before, and we never attempted some of those measures because we did not see that pain that now exists.
The relief effort from government has finally gone beyond the realms or limits of the Social Security programs and the stimulus package 2.0. In the weeks leading up to the budget presentation, government had maintained its focus on collecting revenue rather than coming to the aid of citizens as global food prices rose and the cost of living increased. Whether it was the continuous outcry from the people or the consciousness of government ministers being awakened, the major economic issues of high gas prices and exorbitant electricity bills are at last being addressed.
Government will also zero rate the VAT on electricity consumption for domestic consumers with usage up to 500 kilowatt hours per month.
On Sunday, Prime Minister Dr. Kit Mitchell had alluded to possible relief to come in the budget, either by raising the VAT threshold beyond the 99 kilowatts or otherwise. Finance Minister Gregory Bowen has now done that and more.
Government will also remove the environmental levy for all category of consumers whose usage does not exceed 500 kilowatt hours. In other words, Mr. Speaker, domestic customers consuming up to a maximum of 500 kilowatt hours per month will be relieved of government charges on their electricity bills.
The relief, according to Bowen, does not stop there, while noting fuel prices are expected to continue to rise.
A reduction of 25% on the non-fuel charge per kilowatt hour will be instituted for all categories of consumers. These changes will take effect from the next billing cycle.
Taking a snub at WRB, the finance minister says this is only possible because the government of Grenada has controlling shares in Grenlec. A fixed cap on the price of gas and diesel at the pump just in time for Christmas was the other major announcement.
Government will implement a cap of $15 per gallon on gasoline and diesel, effective from the next petroleum price change on December 18th, 2021.
VAT exemptions on 5 items, including saltfish and turkey parts, are also scheduled to become effective January 2022. I am Gerard Joseph for GBN News.
And I'm going straight to Roderick. He's been quiet for a little bit. Roderick, is it a Santa Claus budget?
Well, it depends on who is receiving the prices and the gifts. Of course, we have to understand the country has been going through significant challenges. The prices of inputs to our farmers, to our households, and not just in the farming enterprise, but just in our lives. We're speaking about 15,000 farmers and a family. So they are a significant part of this space. And so the increase in those prices for fuel and all of those things do affect the fishers. Have to be using this fuel to go to the sea. So we welcome that. What we haven't heard is how long that will be for. Will it be for 6 months, for a year, for 5 months? So of course we need to look at those details downstream. It's good that within the government wisdom and the pressures from the outside, we see that, but we also have to recognize the issue with the saltfish and the turkey and all of those things, removing the VAT. You know, we have to sometimes smile, you know, because yes, we can take out the 15% VAT on saltfish, which is a major product. I've been speaking about it. We know during the revolution we had a saltfish factory producing saltfish and so on locally. We have a good industry that has a lot of potential. So it's also a good time. We should have been able to see within the budget an investment of maybe $500,000 or $750,000 that can go towards producing our own saltfish here, such that in the next year or two, we don't have to import even all of this saltfish. So I'm saying all of this that we have to be mindful, Odette, that remember the context of this budget is in terms of a 2035 plan. Eh? And so whatever we are doing in this budget now should be getting us closer. The issue of food security, when you read the theme, it speaks to that. So taking out the VAT and so on the saltfish might be good in the now, but it's not good in terms of the long term. Okay? So I think we still have to look at some other areas, despite all the initiative that has taken place. Of course, our good friend Mikol speak about we have to figure out when we give those concessions, where does government get the money from to support that? But we need to look still at some other areas. You know, for example, the government also mentioned they didn't have it, the issue of concessions on fertilizer. Okay? So this is another area we have to look at. That whole input area, I've spoken about this before. And so we need to have some review of all of this to be able to improve our food security. So whether it's a Christmas budget, my election budget, I think that we as a people have to make sure that we utilize those concessions that are provided. And we also need to keep giving feedback, because sometimes we may have a plan and we may make an intervention, but the desired result we're still not getting. So we need to know what is the desired result. Will you see more production? Will you see more consumption? Will you see reduction in input? So I think that will have to be the next step we have to look at. And as I mentioned before, and I want to say that, is that we need to have a proper monitoring and evaluation of the impact, just like how we monitor the issue with the FARC. I think it is the FARC with that whole financial commitment and the country financial keeping with the financial rules. We need to have a similar mechanism when it comes to our whole food and nutrition security. And if we don't do that, all the efforts that we are doing here today, some of us may not even be alive to see the real benefit in 2035. So this is the concern I have.
About we should have had probably our own saltfish production company at it going in full swing. And Brian, I want to come back to you shortly, but let me cross to Jamaica and go to Mikol. Mikol, you spoke about the CAPEX, the capital expenditure budget, and now that Roderick has brought up this whole thing about food security, and probably we should be seeing some funds being pumped into agro-processing projects.
Definitely, but if I can use an example from Jamaica, we were able to move more funds to capital expenditure once we reduced our debt burden. So debt consolidation is important, but shifting funds to capital expenditure from that reduction is probably what makes the most sense. I'm not sure if I agree with Roderick in terms of the saltfish production based on global prices. For the most part, there are certain things that are always going to be cheaper to import. So full-scale import substitution tend not to be the best strategy if you can make the money somewhere else. Is it actually worth putting in the capital investment into, for example, a saltfish factory when it probably will be cheaper to import the saltfish from either Portugal or Canada? In terms of the VAT measures, though, we have done a similar thing in Jamaica in terms of having a basket of goods where there is no, in our case, GCT, which is our version of VAT. However, what you note with that is that, does it really help who is it? Does it really help who it's originally intended to help? Because if you look on from a capacity perspective, persons who are going to be buying more saltfish, more cooking oil, more cheddar cheese, more split peas are persons who actually don't need the VAT reduction. So the few persons will save the little extra dollar in terms of purchasing these products. They might end up spending it elsewhere. So in my opinion, it's neither here nor there. But I think more so the electricity and the gas are probably more in line with, if I can dub him Santa Bowen, all right, with a Santa Claus type measure, because what you say is that if you do have this reduction in electricity across all sectors, then you would actually be able to have cheaper production, particularly where you have manufacturing, cheaper electricity costs in construction, cheaper electricity costs for farmers, particularly those who have chicken farms, and so on. So that reduction might actually be a much better one for the economy, as opposed to the VAT reduction for those 5 products.
Well said and well scrutinized. Brian, I know you're itching to go on those measures. I see you nodding. Let's go, Brian.
Well, I'm listening, I'm learning here. I'm listening, I'm learning a lot from my fellow panelists, but I also have my own observations. Now, I looked at the report from the Fiscal Responsibility Oversight Committee from 2020. And key in that report on page 29, it spoke to economic diversification on agriculture, manufacturing, and fishing, and a higher investment in healthcare. Now, on page 60 of that said document, there is a recommendation of diversify, decentralize, and digitize. Now, I listened to Parliament today, and I believe one of the parliamentarians said this is a cut and paste budget. And what we are seeing here is that there is no diversification, there is no creativity, there is no transformation regarding the budget. We are just seeing the same things repeated over and over again. I looked at the budget, yes, and I look at the major private investment program. 5 of them, all 5 of them, the major ones, have to do with basically hotels and tourism. There is nothing about agro-processing. Now, an excuse can be made, well, this is COVID time, but we have been speaking about the same thing for years. And the person in Parliament who spoke on the lack of creativity and the fact that it's a cut and paste budget is spot on, because those private sector projects spoken of, boasted of in such glowing terms, add up to $500 million, $500 million. In one of them, we're talking about a hotel that costs $56 million with 160 rooms thereabout, and it redounds to 15 jobs, long-term jobs for Grenadians. I mean, are we serious? Are we serious about moving our country forward? No wonder we speak about a strong desire on the political landscape for new ideas, fresh ideas. That is very important. So, one thing I want to add before I turn over to you, there was a lot of talk about, removal of VAT on certain items. I think there should be removal of VAT across the board on medication. Why do I say that? I believe that with the tremendous delay in the implementation of the national health insurance, we are supposed to get an ease in terms of our health care. Imagine our retirees. Our retirees have no pension and they still have to pay pound and crown to go and buy medication. So I think the government, there is an opportunity here to remove that on medicine to ease the burden of our retirees who at this point have no pension and have no way of paying for those expensive medication.
But the Minister of Finance will respond and say, Mr. Grimes, listen, you wanted your 4%, you strike, you did all kinds of things, you marched on the road, and I have to find the money to pay you. Where would I find the money to pay you?
Listen, I want to add, Odette, that I believe in the creativity of this government. This government found $200 million in short order to give to WRB. I am confident that they will be creative enough to find some ways to fill the gap.
Punctuation mark placed right there to let our listeners and viewers know that we welcome your contribution to the discourse this evening. The number you can call is 440-1252. 440-1252 to let us get your feedback on the 2022 budget as presented by the Honorable Minister of Finance, the Honorable Gregory Boeing in Parliament last Friday. The budget debate continues. Brian, what are your thoughts on the 13-month salary that public workers will be getting this year?
Yeah, well, I am happy about it. I think it is a good gesture. I am not shocked because in my opening salvo, I spoke to the fact that we are in recession and the government needs to possibly have a deficit budget where they spend a lot and give a lot of relief to our citizens. And let me tell you, our public officers, particularly, all of them, but the health sector, they showed out. The frontline officers, they showed out. So they had, to me, the government had no choice but to do that. They have been working hard, but they are facing so much of disillusionment based on how they are treated, the fact that so many of them are temporary, the fact that so many of them have not seen salary increases. So I think that is a step in the right direction. But I must have a caveat here. We are not over the moon with this month's salary. I want to repeat that the Grenada Public Workers Union, we are looking for government, and we trust that they will do the right thing and regularize our public officers. We trust that they will do the right thing and ensure that in the name of equity and equality, that when the 4% is paid in January of 2022, our contract officers will see the benefit to that also. We are not a nation of Esau's within the public service. You cannot, for lack of a better word, just give us, I won't use that word. You cannot just give us a one-off and expect us to be satisfied. We are looking long term. We are looking at the future. We are looking down the road. And we trust that the government understands this position and they will operate and make policy decisions to suit.
We have a call on the line. Caller, good evening. It's great to have you as our first caller this evening.
Hi, good night, Ms. Campbell.
Good night.
Good night to the gentleman on the panel. So,
good night,
I would like to speak about being fair. With all due respect to public service workers and the contribution they're doing for the system, and the country of Grenada. But on the other hand, we have to look at the other workers too, who is contributing to the same development of Grenada. And the first issue, we have to look at the present minimum wage. That is what hindering people from spending power. Some of us do have entitlement to gratuity and pension. Some of us have to save towards these things, pension and things. That is a basic honest work person in the country. So no, we have to be fair. We have to be equal. You understand? It's true public workers are doing a good job and they're entitled to that. But we have to think in a more human way of mind, because Grenada is not just built by public workers alone. Grenada is built by everybody else. The common worker who working on penny bills, penny light bill, penny water bill. You understand what I'm saying? Who have a mortgage to pay, thing. So now we have to stretch our mind, come out, try and think out of the box. It's true, we fighting our cause for public workers, but we have to fight our cause for everybody. Prices rising, things going up. You understand? We have to look at still with the workers. You have to look at welfare. And with everybody, because everybody is a worker.
All right. Thank you so much, Cole. I think we get the drift, that there must be a holistic view. Brian, what are your thoughts on the timing of this? Do you think recent political developments would have influenced the announcements made in Parliament?
Odette, you're putting me on the spot here. I think there are a number of reasons that the government had what we call a generous budget. I spoke to the absolute need that they must have done it. I think the hyperactivity of the trade unions in this period contributed to it. Also the workers speaking out, because government had a lot of consultations with workers, health sector workers, police officers, and they spoke to the suffering, the economic suffering and other things. So I think that contributed. But certainly, the political landscape, how it has transformed in recent times, have provided, I think, some sort of motivation for the incumbent government. In that, in any field, competition is necessary. We see what the president of Digicel did with cable and wireless, what it did for the consumers. The same is said with politics and with our citizens. When there is balance in the political playing field, in our democracy, our citizens benefit. So I think the emergence of new leadership within the National Democratic Congress has sort of pique the interest of the incumbent government and put them on their toes because they may have been a bit lackadaisical. That is just my opinion. In responding to the caller quickly, I understand the plight of the young man.
Brian, let me just ask you to stick a point on here because we have a call and sometimes people are calling on cell phones and we don't want them to be burning up credit. So let's take another call and then we can always come back to it. Caller, good evening and thanks for your patience.
Good evening. I just want to congratulate Mr. Forget his name on the saltfish issue. Since I've been a child, I'm in my 80s. Grenada has been using saltfish as one of its main dishes, and up to now we have so much fish wasting around, and up to now we haven't got or we're not producing our own saltfish. We have all these fruit wasting. We can't produce our own fruits. But the main point I want to make about this budget is I haven't heard anything mentioned about the vaccine, the people who are refusing to have vaccine. Are we going to let them go on the street without a job, without a home, without being able to maintain their family? I mean, one must have a right to say yes when yes is right and say no when no is right.
Well, I think, caller, with all due respect, we welcome the interjection here, but I think in the budget they don't deal with matters like that. It's a fiscal package, so I'm certain the government will continue to articulate its position on the vaccination policy, but we do welcome the interjection. Thank you so much for the contribution. We truly appreciate it. Brian, I know you want to go to the caller, but let me just cross quickly to Mikol and ask him, Mikol, what is the intersection between socioeconomics and geopolitics, looking at the timing of the offerings being made by the government? Brian alluded to probably it's being influenced by recent changes on the political landscape.
Well, the timelines within politics are both long and short, and every single move is usually scrutinized for what it is as well as for what it isn't. So for example, there are going to be some times when a government makes a particular move and it seems as if this is to score political points, when really and truly it's something that probably would have needed to be done before. So the challenge is always going to be striking the balance between a level of fairness as well as being able to manage and govern in such a way, but at the same time, a politician really needs to get reelected. So that is always going to be a part of the equation. So politician needs to get elected, you need to focus on social issues, you need to manage finances properly. All three of these things go into that geopolitical and socio-political equation.
Excellent. I want to go to Roderick to ask him a question, but we have a call and we try to take them as they come in to minimize wait time. Caller, good evening.
Good evening, Mrs. Campbell, and good evening to your panelists.
Good evening.
In reference to one of your previous callers, I would simply like to remind him that the actions and the lack thereof, or the policies and the behaviors of a government, sets the tone for both the private sector and the public sector. If an employer, being the government, abuses and mistreats their employees, the public sector sees it fit to do the same by fine example set. Thank you.
Thank you, caller, for that. Roderick, you want to chime in on anything here before we go to Brian, who wants to revisit the issue?
Oh, no, I think okay.
Okay, you think you're going to pass. Brian, you wanted to comment on something that our first caller said.
Yeah, this caller responded to the young man. I want to respond to him because a lot of our young people are frustrated in this country. And I want young people in Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Marty to become more politically aware and more politically astute. use your democratic rights, adult suffrage, go vote, register to vote, do what you have to do. Because at the end of the day, calling in on the program will not cut it alone. You have to stain your finger and make sure who is representing you has your interest at heart. Now, the reason I spoke to that is because of the fact that minimum wage in Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique, based on the labor code, a section of the labor code, which slips my mind at this point, but it's in there. I think it's section 55 of the Employment Act, but I'm subject to correction. There are provisions in there for minimum wage to be reviewed every 3 years. The last time minimum wage was reviewed in Grenada was in 2011. How long? That's basically a decade ago, and I think security guards benefited from that. So we as citizens have to hold our parliamentarians and our policymakers accountable, right? Do not blame trade unionists for fighting for their constituents, but ensure that those who you elect to represent your views are doing the right thing. Now, the second caller spoke to the vaccine. And yes, it may not have a direct implication on the budget, but I think there is an indirect contact there. In the fact that if you are looking at dropping or reducing the unemployment rate, how can you match this? How can you match mandatory vaccination and you're trying to ensure that employment is at its optimum level? That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. What we see with mandatory vaccination is a lot of people are losing their job. A lot of people are denied access to getting jobs, and a lot of people are denied the constitutional right to work. So I think mandatory vaccination, while it's not direct, it doesn't have direct involvement with the budget, it has some indirect contact. And I agree with the caller that it's unconstitutional, it's inhumane, and it's undemocratic. And I don't think this helps our Grenadian society.
But as far as you know, has the government instituted a mandatory vaccination policy?
Yes, I think one of the panelists here, or maybe a caller, spoke to the government providing the environment for things to happen. They set the trend. What happened with St. George's University? Leaders of government have gone on record, senators and so forth. I would not call name of saying St. George's University did the right thing. The government or the regulator. You look across the shores in Barbados. The Prime Minister of Barbados ensures that even though there are not regulations directly involved with something, she chimes in on matters that can affect citizens where big corporations are taking advantage of the citizen. Have you seen government step in regarding mandatory vaccination at St. George's University or any institution or corporation for that matter and say, do not do this to our citizens? Ask yourself that question.
It is quite possible because what should have been a 2-week response from the Labour Commissioner has gone apparently into 3.5 and possibly 4. So probably the government is intervening there, don't you think?
Time will tell.
Time will tell. Let's go back to Mikol. Mikol, you wanted to take a look at the CBI.
Yes, I'm glad that it actually came up in the conversation, something about youth unemployment particularly. So in the pandemic, what we've noticed is that the youth have been disproportionately affected, number one. And then in terms of the CBI, or as you call it, the citizens by invitation,
by investment.
Investment. The citizenship by investment. Sorry, it's clearly not a concept that I am particularly familiar with, given my Jamaican experience. However, on reviewing it, what I saw was that there are two options, and the two options are very skewed towards investment in either the National Transformation Fund, which I couldn't really find too much information about, outside of the fact that, the government was going to be funding a part of the budget from a drawdown from the National Transformation Fund, as well as direct investments into government-sponsored real estate projects. Now, clearly, here we have an opportunity, as Roderick would have suggested, that instead of just construction and tourism projects, you have agro-processing projects, you have other projects, because if you're offering this premium product, as it is a premium product, to foreign investors, then you should be channeling these funds into productive areas, and productive areas that you can get individuals to begin to create businesses which are then funded by some of these funds. Also, another suggestion is to offer an alternate solution similar to what is offered in the United States in terms of their investment program, which is for foreigners to come in and to set up businesses and hire Grenadians directly. And these individuals should be hired for a fixed duration. If you have these things happening, what you will begin to see is that you'll begin to see additional investments coming into the country and staying in the country, because you will have persons who are directly being or directly benefiting from these investments. Because if you look at the real estate investment program, which I think is $220,000 US. The minimum investment is $50,000. Essentially, the investor gets back the rest of their money after the 5-year period. So quite a bit of that funding is not going to stay in the country, right? Which means that the channeling for that program should be more so towards investing activities that create employment, not just rooms at hotels or properties.
Food for thought there, food for thought. We have a caller, and this will be our final caller of the evening. Caller, thanks for waiting.
Good evening. Hello?
Yes, please, go ahead, we're hearing you.
Yeah, my concern is this. We know that more chicken is being used in the country than turkey. So why did the government choose to give an ease on the turkey and not the chicken? More consumers use chicken. So could you tell me why?
All right, let's ask that. Let me just take a quick break. There's an emergency in studio.
Are you looking for quality herbs and herbal supplements, or are you thinking about having a complete body cleanse to jumpstart your health? Then no need to look further. Visit Nirvana Natural Health Clinic, Detox Center, and Natural Health Store. We carry a wide range of herbal products for kidney and gallstone cleansing, male sexual enhancement formulas, asthma and sinusitis, gas and bloating, acid reflux, constipation, arthritis, imbalanced hormones, female health issues, liver cleansing, weight loss, and so much more. Also available, colonic irrigation, holistic health consultations, essential oils, and diffusers. Look out for our online natural health store coming soon. Call 231-6642 418-7115 or 449-7753 to find out about our delivery options or to book an appointment. Visit us at Belmont St. George's, close to the Foliage, Monday to Saturday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Nirvana Natural Health Clinic. Detox your way to health.
It's the season to give, and Granlec invites you to give a gift of love and light to someone in our community who has been challenged by COVID-19. Make your account current and nominate someone for a chance to win. 200 winners will be gifted with a $400 grocery voucher or a $75 electricity voucher. If we select your entry, you too will win. Visit our website or Facebook page for more information. Terms and conditions apply. Promotion runs November 24th to December 24th. Give a gift from Grenlec this holiday.
Total is one of the world's largest oil companies with a top quality line of lubricants. Total Lubricants has a full product line from passenger cars, motorcycle, heavy industrial equipment, mining, trucking, agriculture, and manufacturing machines and vehicles. Total Lubricants, winning championships in motorsports, including Formula One and World Rally Championships. Total Lubricants are available at all Rubis service stations, leading automotive shops, and distributed by Huggins.
If there was ever a time to keep and stay healthy, it's now! We at Hills and Valley are here to help you take deliberate steps to maintain your health. We stayed true to maintaining the most comprehensive rates while stocking the widest range of medicines and health devices, including personal protective equipment. There are so many benefits shopping with us. You get great savings through discounts for senior citizens and reward cards for loyal customers. Ask about owning yours today. Visit us at Halifax and Grenville Street, St. George, Jubilee Street opposite the Grenville Bus Terminal, and at Hillsborough, Carriacou. Our wholesale distribution on Halifax Street also stocks the widest range of pharmaceuticals. We are with you on the hills and in the valleys. We are Hills and Valley Pharmacy.
And thanks for journeying with us this evening on Beyond the Headlines. We've come to the place where we take closing comments. And our closing comments, first of all, this evening will come from Mr. Roderick Sinclair. He's the agricultural sector representative in the Senate. Roderick, your closing thoughts.
Yeah, well, my closing thoughts is directly to the last caller. The last caller, I understand his logic because a lot of chicken is imported, reduce the VAT, more persons would benefit. At the same time, caller, that logic also has another interesting turn because you would realize that the cost of poultry has increased significantly for our poultry farmers. In fact, that is a major issue that is being negotiated right now with the government from an industry stakeholder standpoint, both supermarket farmers, etc. And of course, the idea is how do we make our local poultry cheaper and more affordable for our local consumers to reduce the import bill. So government acting in that thought that you have will be contrary to the spirit in which we are operating right now. So we all look forward to the day when we can have a more affordable local chicken, able to improve our food import bill and also improve our security. I would say, Odette, in closing, that thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for interacting with our fellow panelists and, of course, the wider community. And the budget as presented from the budget speech, I would say is an interesting one. There are many benefits for some persons. There are challenges for others. We still have to keep debating and fine-tune and let the government realize that some of the items maybe need tweaking along the way. So I'm not really worried in the now. And of course, in the next 2 weeks, the Senate would meet and I would have more detailed responses to a lot of this, which, you know, I really cannot go into these details here because it's not the direct forum for that sort of debate. So I would say I would ask all to listen out, and anyone have ideas that they want to contribute, they can contact me to help in that whole debate process. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Brian, your closing thoughts this evening, are we on the nose on 9:30?
Yeah, well, I just want to thank you, Odette and GBN, for giving the union the platform to, expound on some of the many issues that we face here in Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martin. I want to encourage workers to, the money is received in December, to save some of that money for a rainy day. Spend some. Some may not be able to save based on the conditions that they face, the financial conditions, but I want to encourage them to save some and put some probably in a credit union, a riser, communal credit union, and save for a rainy day. Get some interest there because it's a windfall with that money. I just want to say too that many public officers were saying that, in the budget, the government should have taken the opportunity to pay the dock salaries that was docked in 2018 and sort of give an olive branch and build a relationship, that bipartisan relationship between union and government. But that opportunity may have passed. There is still time in 2022. We look forward as a union in 2022 because we hear the political leader of the country is stating, at least with words, that he understands the plight of contract workers in this country. So we look forward to regularization of those contract workers in 2022, and at the very least, payment of the 4% increases that we are due in 2022 to demonstrate that he truly understands the pain and it's not just lip service. So Merry Christmas to my panelists, Merry Christmas to you, to Odette, and Merry Christmas to the whole of Grenada, Carriacou and PD Martinique. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and we're raising a toast to life. And the final word this evening from Mikol Mortley out of Jamaica. Mikol, your closing thoughts.
I'd just like to thank you, Odette, and the fellow panelists, and I guess the people of Grenada for having me. I would like to just leave a few words in the sense that in this period still of uncertainty, we need to focus on fiscal sustainability on the side of the government. We need to focus on diversification of the economy going forward to meet that 2035 goal, as well as, from my own personal point of view, we also need to look at investing in private sector-led innovation and enterprise. If COVID has taught us anything, it has taught us that people can be innovative and we can make money and we can make investments almost anywhere. So thanks again for having me. Thanks again to Odette and to the panelists, and good night.
Thank you so much, Mikol, and to our panelists, we want to thank you so much, Mr. Roderick Clair, the Agriculture and Fisheries Representative in the Senate, the President of the Public Workers Union, Mr. Brian Grimes, and economist, Mr. Mikol Mortley out of Jamaica. And as we mentioned earlier in the program, he serves as Jamaica House Fellow in the Office of the Prime Minister of Jamaica. And please extend my sincerest thanks to Prime Minister Holness for agreeing to your participation in tonight's program. We know sometimes that, for various reasons, we don't get permission when we seek permission, but thank your Prime Minister Holness for us, and we hope that we could have him on the program at some point so you could start some lobbying for us there, Mikol. Thank you so much in advance for that, probably in 2022. We'll see how that goes. And to all of you, valued listeners and viewers, wherever you have tuned in from this evening, as always, the GBN is pleased to cut through numbers, dissect the issues, and to take the issues to you. To those of you who called or contributed by our social media platforms, our sincerest thanks. The Team GBN, who continues to wave the flag and keep Grenada informed, educated, and looking at different issues from different points of view. We want to thank you so much, Team GBN. So long for now. We'll see you again next week. We'll have another economic discussion next week, not necessarily on the budget, but I'm certain issues in the budget will be brought to the fore based on next week's discussion. The panel is already lined up. We'll let you in on that throughout the week. God bless. Safe journeys home wherever you're journeying, and a toast to life after a difficult year. See you again, Grenada.
What does it take to be an amazing woman? Lots of me time. Amazing women are classy, fancy, and a little sassy. It's the drink for me. Cheers! Sometimes you've got to show them who's boss. Alpha male? Nah, alpha females are more amazing. Cheers.